Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another week of our 50 Days DNA Health and Wellness Challenge. I'm here with Tolu Feromika. Welcome.
Hi.
Tolu is a PhD student in clinical psychology at York University in Canada. So that's interesting. I don't think we've had a speaker who is from Canada so far. Her work bridges psychology mentorship and community impact. Following her undergrad degree, she completed her master's in clinical psychology, also at the same university, York University. And she is supported by awards such as the inaugural Heart and Stroke Foundation scholarship, and her research examines how disruptions to different brain regions affect spatial memory and navigation, advancing our understanding of brain behavior relationships. Beyond research, Tolu is passionate about making science accessible and actionable. As host and producer of the BrainCore podcast, she brings psychology and neuroscience to a global audience, translating complex ideas into meaningful conversations. She also mentors undergraduate students through York's Psychology Undergraduate Mentorship Program, supporting and informing their academic and professional development. Her leadership extends internationally through the African Impact Initiative, where she leads and consults on programs that empower young African entrepreneurs to create sustainable, community-driven solutions. So that was a mouthful. We got ourselves a superstar here, ready to talk about mental health. And we just want to thank you again for being here with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about emotional health, resilience, mental health literacy, basically looking at healing the mind to protect the body, mental wellness as preventative health. So I just want to welcome you again. And is there anything you want to say to start off before we jump right into some questions I have for you?
Uh, I feel like we're gonna get into it. I'm really excited about this topic just because I know it's something that we often think are disconnected, this idea of mental wellness and also physical wellness. So I think it's something that should be talked about more. And so I'm really happy to be part of the conversation.
Yes, indeed, indeed, and we're happy to have you for this conversation. Um, So when we, I know I've met a lot of people who think this way. So people often think mental health is in the mind and in the mind alone. So how does mental health and emotional wellness affect the entire body, or in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, obviously I'll be sharing my opinion, but I'll also be talking from a research perspective. That's the background I have, in addition to maybe the clinical training that I have. And I think one thing that research shows, and perhaps we also know intuitively, is that the brain is part of the body, right? So just from that statement, mental health cannot just be in the mind alone. It's also going to have effects on our body. And I think we also experience that when we're stressed, right? We know that it affects our sleep. We know that it affects our appetite. We know that it affects our mood. We know that it affects how we are physically, right? Then you feel fatigued or you feel slowed down, or some people actually feel quite restless and they feel like they have to keep moving. And so we're already seeing how things that are happening in our mind are affecting other parts of our body. And I think to take it even deeper, if you want to get into biology, we all know what the stress hormone is. So this is cortisol, and this is usually released when we are experiencing stress. And the thing about cortisol and just how our body works is that we have a pretty good system. Our system reacts pretty well to when things are happening, right? Our fight or flight comes on when we see a threat. And so it's important that these systems are regulated and that they're working well because they are set up in an appropriate way. Right. But I like to use the example of the fire alarm that we have in our kitchens, right? So there are times when the fire alarm is going off because there is an actual fire. So it's important that the fire alarm goes off. But I don't know if you've ever been cooking and had the fire alarm go off when, there's just like a little bit of smoke coming out of the
Yeah.
oven or something. Yeah, like, and then you have to like, keep waving at the fire alarm and open all the doors and windows just so that smoke can go out. And it's like there wasn't an actual fire. But the important thing is that the fire alarm goes off when there's an actual fire. And so if we take that same analogy and apply it to our bodies and how we respond to stress, for example, we want to make sure that the cortisol was being released when we are experiencing something that is stressful, that our fight or flight is coming on when we do see a bear in the woods, as opposed to when we have an exam coming up or when we want to have a conversation with someone and all of a sudden, like, like we're sweaty, and so it's really important that we don't have this chronic dysregulation because it affects our sleep, it affects our metabolism, it even affects how our brain regions function and are structured. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit. That emotional wellness is such a key part of how our body functions, and that when we disregard it, it can have a lot of effects, a lot of long-term effects on how our body functions.
Wow. Well, yeah, thank you for that. I went on a little trip there when you talked about the fire alarm in the kitchen. I try to call myself a home cook, and that's definitely happened to me more than I'd like to admit. But
Yeah.
I never heard someone refer to, or at least talk about a fight or flight response in the context of it maybe not going off appropriately when we want it to or don't want it to. So that was interesting to hear. I certainly hope when I see a bear in the woods, my body reacts appropriately.
Right? Yeah.
So so why is this conversation especially important for people of African descent? So Africans in the African diaspora.
Hmm. I think that it's, as a person I was born in Nigeria and I was raised in Nigeria. And so this is my community, this African community's diaspora. And I also live in Canada. So um, I have a pretty good understanding of how we talk about mental health and how we approach it. And I think even when we look at African American history, we can also see that there are some tensions when it comes to how we interface with the medical system. So of course, we want to talk about mental wellness, but just talking about physical wellness or just wellness in general, we have a pretty difficult history with the professionals that should have been providing services to us. And so I think when I approach this topic or this conversation, I like to do it with a bit of empathy and just understanding that it is important to have these conversations, but I also understand why we don't have these conversations as much, or why we may have a bit of why we may be more cautious approaching these conversations. So I just like to state that and have an air of like openness and curiosity here. I think it's especially important for our diaspora and just African communities to be talking about mental wellness because we have a culture that often invalidates or disregards our emotions or our mental well-being. And so what this can kind of look like is that we're very resilient. I think when I even think about where I come from, coming from Nigeria, like when I think about Nigerians or just Africans in general, we've been through a lot, and our history is is fraught with trauma and loss and so many generational cycles that we're all individually trying to break out of. And we're doing so in a way it's kind of with brute force, or we often try to do it with brute force, like I will be okay, I'll be fine. I just have to keep pushing through and I have to keep pushing through. And I think there's this idea that's also seeped into how we understand wellness, that we can withstand a lot of pain, or that we can withstand a lot of struggling and suffering because we just know how to get through it. And so we completely miss out on some of the humanistic things that we all need to get through it: rest, joy, um, sleep, conversations with a therapist, conversations in general about how we're doing mentally. And so a lot of us kind of grow up with this mentality that we have to stay strong, that we should not rest, and that if we do rest, we are lazy. Or if you're spiritual, kind of taking a spiritual angle and saying, oh, this is something that you can just pray about, continue to suffer through, and everything will be okay. And so I think one of the things that I like to say is that it's really hard to break a pattern if you're not aware of what the pattern actually is. And so these conversations are really important to be having with our communities and even individually, even with our friends, because we're all affected by these cultural norms that exist. And unless we want to continue these generational cycles, we have to approach it a different way than we've historically done. So that's why I think these conversations are important to have.
Yes, I was listening to you and I couldn't help but just like nod my head at every single point because as an African American, I grew up in these communities and most of my family were older, from the older generations, and like talking about how you're really doing wasn't really a thing. And people, even if they didn't say it, they would say things like, "Oh, stop crying," or "Stop this," or "Stop that." Sometimes
Mhm.
when people had like actual things going on, and so that was interesting. And then even I don't want to diverge too much, but I went to a wedding and um, it was in South Africa, and I'm out there and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, this is so sweet. And I'm talking to the other guys and they're like, oh, yeah, these things happen. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? Like, this is a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. And so I do think you have a point that it just needs to kind of be like a collective shift and an individual one. It probably needs to happen on more than one level of just how we have these conversations, how we view mental health and emotional wellness. So yeah, I
Hmm.
just yeah.
Yeah, like to your point there, even being at the wedding and having that emotional expression or like tearing up and sharing it with a friend in that way, you're also even modeling that perhaps it's okay. Like it's okay to cry at a friend's wedding because this is not a thing that happens every day. Like your friend moving into a new chapter in their lives. And to that person, you may not even know. And these are some of the things that I like to highlight is that for us in that moment, we are just being ourselves and we're expressing ourselves and we're doing something that is maybe even normal to us. Like we know that it's okay to cry in that moment. But to that friend that was next to you that was like, it's okay, whatever, bro. For him, that could actually have been like a learning moment where later on, when he does feel like he is tearing up at a similar event, he's like, well, like Albert did it and he was fine. Like he didn't combust, right? And
Yeah.
perhaps like yeah, like it's what I should be doing in this moment and that it's okay to be doing that. So that's why even individually, I think it's important. I don't think it's just a like the collective is made out of individuals, right? And so with me, like I will talk about how therapy went with my friends. Like I will talk about if I am approaching burnout with my friends. I'll talk about some of the self-care strategies that I have in place so that they also know that it's okay. Like this is a safe space for them to also share what's going on with them. And I think this conversation, even with Black men in particular, is something that I hope will continue to be fostered. So good on you for crying at the wedding.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a weird moment because I was like, what? And it was
Mm,
yeah, I had to like talk to some people. I was like, was I wrong? Did I do
mhm,
something wrong at that moment? They were like,
mhm.
no, man, it was beautiful. And I was like, okay, well, but I do agree, and yeah, I don't wanna beat a dead horse, but yeah, I think something you said about like talking with friends. I think like having that conversation and like normalizing it, you're not only helping yourself, but you're helping others. And that's what
Yeah.
we should all, take pride in. Everyone's better when everyone's better. So,
Mhm,
so to move on, I know you talked about stress,
mhm,
um, appropriate stress responses and cortisol and things of that nature and how it affects us physically. Um,
mhm.
so could you speak a little bit more about what happens to our body when we have too much chronic stress and when we're carrying emotional wounds that we're not like healing or addressing properly?
Yeah, yeah. I think when we put some of these wounds away, um, we don't actually engage in some of the things that promote healing. And so experiencing chronic stress for some can become a norm. And unfortunately, chronic stress is associated with a whole host of things, right? We know that it affects our immune system. So there are some people who find themselves constantly going to the hospital or constantly in need of medical care, and they're not sure what's going on. And then when like when someone walks into the clinic and we do an assessment or we do an interview or clinical interview, we listen and we hear so many stressful things going on, no coping strategies, no stress management going on. And there's this kind of, like I'm doing all the things that like I need to be doing and I'm still wondering what's going on with me. And so that's all to say that, again, just going back to the point that it's not all in the mind. It can't all be in the mind. And it's also not a Western idea. I think that's another important point as to why it's important to have these conversations in African communities is that, I've had conversations with friends about this, and sometimes you hear this idea that it is a Western thing, or that this is a thing that, therapy is also only for white people. However, when you actually look at our history, which is so rich, African history is so rich, and we've always had counselors, we've always had advisors that are there that kind of act as a third party that can give an external view to what's going on. It's really difficult to know what's going on in the house from within the house, right? So it's important to go to someone who is able to look at the big picture and say, hey, here are all of the things that are stressing you out. Here are some patterns that I'm seeing. And then working together, that's really what therapy is working together collaboratively to develop some coping strategies, a way to manage one's stress. And so we're not trying to take away the stress. There are obviously some ways to reduce maybe what one is going through in terms of, okay, like you prioritize what you want to focus on. But really in therapy, what you're doing is working together to then figure out, okay, well, how do I continue to do what I'm doing, but in a more productive way? And so it doesn't get into affecting your immune system, for example, or resulting in fatigue or mood symptoms. You find that you are starting to feel depressed, or long-term health risks, for example. A lot of the time in African communities, we also struggle with things that are preventable, like hypertension, stroke, certain seizures. And so I think the big picture here is that stress is not good. Chronic stress is not good, and it can actually have a lot of effects on our body. And the most important thing is awareness. And I think this is something that is easier said than done. I also want to say that because I don't want it to sound like all you need to do is go to therapy, or, there's one pill that you need to take. I think there are many aspects to it. It can come from having a conversation with a friend. It can come with monitoring your body when you're going through your day, right? When I wake up in the morning, what am I doing? Is that in itself even adding to my stress? There's some people that wake up and immediately, they look at their phone, emails, things to do, things to do, things to do, things to do. And so you're starting your day off already stressed. And so it's something that people can kind of, this journey that they can embark on themselves. But it's if you feel like you might be in need of services or greater support, that's when therapy comes in. Or if you feel like you are attempting to do these things yourself and you're having difficulty, that's when I think it's important to seek services and to know that it's okay to seek out services.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. I mean, and I think I agree, and I know the point that you made about like stress maybe in itself isn't necessarily issues, but how do we for one, how do we deal with the stress? And are there things that we're doing to like add to it or like maybe not like waking up in the morning? I know I've been guilty of this. Like wake up in the morning and I'm checking emails and responding to emails.
Same here. Same here. Yeah.
And it's like, well, and then I try to go back to sleep and I'm like, no, I can't go to sleep now. Like now I've only had 4 hours of sleep, 4 or 5 hours of sleep.
Mhm.
So it's I think that's something that and I think the point that you also made about it not necessarily being easy and not always being a one trick pony in terms of like here's a quick fix.
Yeah.
I think it's important, like as you said, that you day to day because it's gonna be a daily thing. You might have a great day to day where you take care of yourself and then tomorrow, everything, it's like a rainy day, I picture
Mhm.
the thing with the umbrella and the rain over your head. So
Mhm.
I think this all kind of ties into and you touched on this. So I think we can like roll through a few things here is emotional literacy.
Yeah.
I'm hearing some of that from you, speak on that, and also kind of like breaking down sort of these cultural norms and these cycles, these generational cycles, especially prevalent for the African community and the diaspora.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
just wanted to speak on that. Yep.
When you said when you were like growing up, or what you would see in your community also was that if someone was crying, they would be like, well, why are you crying? Right? And what that does, even though it's such a small thing, right, is that it communicates something to the child or to the person crying. One, perhaps crying is not even the appropriate response to the situation. Two, well, I don't know why I'm crying, like I'm a child. I don't know
Yes.
what tears mean,
Yeah.
you know? And three, that expression, that emotional expression is wrong, right? So a lot of the time you when you hear that over and over and over again, it kind of reinforces these ideas that I just mentioned. And then you have a fully grown adult that doesn't know how to name emotions. They just know how to express it, right? So in that moment where a person is crying, instead of saying, "Well, why are you crying?" You can say, like, I see you're feeling a little bit sad. Or, depending on the context, right? Like even at the wedding, like, wow, like these are tears of joy. I see that you're feeling joyful and you're so excited and you're so happy for your friend's wedding. Like that's amazing, right? But when we were able to name emotions, what this does is that then we can do something about it, right? Like then we can address it directly. A lot of the time when we were just expressing things and we're crying, we're yelling, we're irritable, and we don't really know how to name it, then we don't really know how to address it directly or figure out what this needs. So for example, in a situation where a child is crying and you say, "Oh, I see that you're so sad," right? Maybe they lost a toy or something. "Oh, you're so sad," you know, and that's okay. Like, like you don't know where you put that toy. Maybe you don't have a look for it in a moment, and right then, like the child might still be so, dysregulated that they're like, "No, like I'm just so sad, I'm looking for it," all these things. And it's like, what we understand in psychology is that if a person is feeling sadness, so what they might need is a little bit of comfort. And so before we even get to the fixing and the looking for the toy, we might want to just say, like, yeah, like it's okay. Like it's okay to be sad about this. And when the child hears this, they may not know the word for it, but what you're doing in that moment is validating the emotion and letting them know that it's okay to be sad when a sad thing happens. And having this reinforced gives birth to a human or an adult who is emotionally literate and intelligent, because now they're able to see emotions, they're able to name them, they're able to sometimes even provide what they need for that emotion, right? Like whether it's fear, whether it's anger, whether it's disappointment, whether it's joy, and they're able to give what that emotion needs and then figure out, okay, what do I do? What do I do with that? So I think this is something that is an important skill. It's difficult to attain this skill, especially when it hasn't been modeled for you. I think that's the biggest piece there, is that these are these aren't things that you can just kind of pick up and start doing. And sometimes when you see somebody else doing it, you almost don't even understand what the mechanisms are, right? Like I know how to be angry. I know how to be sad. I don't actually know what happens after. And that's usually what creates these patterns that lead to a person coming into maybe therapy services, or they coming in and seeking support because they're looking at their life and they're saying, Tolu, like I'm just always sad when this thing happens, and like I find myself crying about it, or like I find myself getting angry about it, but then nothing changes. Like even when we talk about generational cycles, nothing changes. And I think that's why I was talking earlier about being aware of the patterns, right? When does my sadness come? How does my sadness look like? What comforts me when I'm sad? Is it journaling? Is it talking to someone? Is it music? Is it having a little bit of alone time? Is it exercise? Is it mindfulness? Is it kind of sitting down with myself and just looking inward for a moment? Is it prioritizing? I'll even give a personal example. Like that was it for me, was prioritizing and also setting up certain boundaries around my time. So it's really helpful for me when I know what my week looks like before I enter into the week. And it's really helpful for me to say no to more things, because I know that I have a limit. I have a capacity. And so when I'm at capacity, or if I go above my capacity, I'm showing up, I'm irritable, I'm sad, I'm fatigued, right? And so I had to put in certain mechanisms to avoid that or to reduce how I get there. And so that's why emotional literacy is important. I think it's also a skill that research or some surveys have shown, I think by 2030 will be one of the most important skills to have. Especially in the age that we're at, technological age, we have AI. And so, and we could talk about that for a pretty long time, but like people are also going to AI for emotional help, right? and to understand what's going on. And I think what's helpful from AI or from from large language models is that they're really helpful with helping you organize your thoughts, but not this piece, not this emotional literacy piece. And it's important to even be having that with another person in front of you, because it also creates this corrective emotional experience, right? It's one thing to be sad and be talking to a bot or an AI model and having it validated for you. It's different having it with a person in front of you who is re-teaching and you relearning that what I learned as a child, that it's not okay to cry in front of someone. Now I'm in front of someone again and they're telling me that it's okay to cry and that this is what it means. So that was just a little deviation there, but yeah.
No, no, that's exactly what we need. That's I think what a lot of people need to hear.
Hmm.
And so I think, yeah, I mean, what you said about like learning those mechanisms to understand like, you know, what your emotions are and how to deal with them in order to try to break these cycles, and to try to gain
Hmm.
some emotional, literacy. I think that's important. Um, So just in case, whenever we have one of these podcasts, I know there's a lot of like an information dump for probably our viewers out there. So I try to like bring it back towards something more manageable towards the end.
Yeah.
So what are some simple and realistic habits that people can start? For anyone listening, you're like, it's too much for me to deal with. They might feel overwhelmed. So what are some simple habits they can do today or this week to try to improve their emotional literacy and mental health?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. No, that's a good point that especially even with social media, like we're receiving advice constantly, right? Like the noise is really hard to get away from the noise. And so I think it's important to find moments where you are away from the noise and can kind of sit with yourself and check in with yourself. And so for me, people do this at different times in the day. So you can also figure out what works for you, whether you're a morning person, an afternoon person, an evening person, and just checking in and being like, where am I at mentally right now, And this can also happen with a friend. If you feel like this is a safe friend, this is a person that you can converse with and just say, like, how am I doing today? How am I doing this week? As I'm looking at my calendar, how am I feeling about it? Are there going to be certain moments in the week that I need to step away because I think I'm going to reach capacity, I'm going to reach burnout? Um, so just checking in with yourself. It's really important to monitor and to be continuously monitoring. Um, with therapy, it's helpful because then you can kind of outsource that process in the session. And they monitor also and say like, like it does sound like this month or this week or today has been quite stressful for you. And they can kind of bring your awareness in, right? I think it's also helpful so that's one. So checking in with yourself. I think two, when you are feeling overwhelmed or like there's a lot going on, just having a moment to bring yourself back to center and grounding yourself is important. And so even on my social media page, like I'll share tips on how to regulate. And this has been so helpful for me. I know it's unbelievable because it's just breathing. It's what we do on a daily basis, on a minutely basis. Like we're constantly breathing, but breathing, deep breathing in particular, intentional breathing is so helpful. I can't say how helpful it is because as we were talking about earlier, we were talking about fight or flight, right? Like this is a process that is ignited in us, and then we start to feel a little panicked, right? Like I'm feeling sweaty, my heart is racing, I can't focus. And so this is a way, if you think about your devices to kind of restore to default, like to get back to default settings. So what breathing does is that deep breathing is that it communicates to your body, hey, there's no bear around us, right? This is an exam. We know the chapters we need to study. And so just taking a moment to, what I do, a lot of people may have heard of box breathing, which is like breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. So what we found is that it's actually important to be breathing out for longer than what you're breathing in. So that's the important piece. So you can breathe in for 4, you can hold for 4, and then you can breathe out for 7 or 8. And so that's what I have shown in some of the videos that I share. And you can do this for 5 minutes if you have 5 minutes. If you have 10 minutes, you can do it for 10 minutes. And so when things are are overwhelming and you feel yourself getting stressed, this is a way to regulate. So that's one, is checking in, right? And if you are okay, then you're okay and you can keep it pushing. But if you're not okay and you feel like you are getting to the point of overwhelm, then you can do a bit of self-regulation. And then I think one other key takeaway that I would say is just seeking support when it's needed. Um, Seeking support does not mean that it doesn't mean that there has to be something intensely wrong going on. So that's another myth that I would like to break, is that this is something I hear even for clients that come in to me, is I hear, oh, I thought that, you had to be having like a severe mental breakdown, or you had to have like a severe mental illness to be going to therapy, or to be getting an assessment, or to, to call someone and ask for help. This is not the case. People come to therapy for a whole host of reasons. I've had people come to therapy because their life is going great and they want it to be going better. And so they're, yeah. So I've heard that. I've heard people come to therapy because, there's a specific pattern that they want to gain a better understanding of, when I am in a relationship, I find that this is something that happens for me. Or people will come and they'll say, like, Tolu, I get really anxious when I'm in this particular context and I don't know why. Right. So it's just to gain a better understanding of yourself. And it's a process that can promote awareness. And as we talked about already, awareness is the first step. So we got them. One is checking in with yourself. Two is those grounding techniques, so mindfulness and deep breathing. And then three is knowing that it's okay to seek help and to seek support. Not always necessarily when it's needed, but also just when it's desired. So,
Wow. I mean, I think I'm definitely going to take some of this away for myself. I was taking mental notes and I was like, okay, one, two, three. And I was like, okay, this is the steps I can take. So here we
mhm.
are, future Dr. Tolu here, helping out.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That was really insightful. So do you have any like final messages you want the listeners to take away from this conversation?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think this is one that is a big takeaway even for myself, is that, as an African, or for those listening, African Americans or African Canadians, or just people who identify as Black, just because our history is framed around struggle or suffering, it doesn't mean that's all we're good at.
Hmm. Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's amazing, and I don't think we can overstate how much our history affects us and is affecting us. It's really important that we start to become more aware. And just not just aware of the things that are negative, but also the things that are positive. One thing about us as a community is that we have a lot of joy, we have a lot of resilience, we have a lot of work ethic. We're some of the most creative people. And I think focusing on those things and instilling a sense of pride in those things. So not only when someone is suffering and they come out of it, you see a lot of headlines that are like, you know, this person used to be homeless and now they're doing great and they own their own company and they're doing all these amazing things. So it's, oh, this person's coming out of suffering and they're coming out of struggle and they're making it. But what you often see is that when they've made it, there is this mentality of turning on them and saying, oh, they've turned their back on the community, or, like they don't see where they're coming from. And so I think it's important to not always let history define us. A lot of what we're doing now, I think, and the trend is moving towards redefining ourselves. And I think it's important to continue to redefine ourselves as a community, as an individual, not always around struggle and suffering. It's important to be aware of it. And we've talked a lot about awareness today. It's important to be aware of it and then ask yourself, and then provide what's required for that awareness, right? So whether it's validation, whether it's understanding, and then we can figure out what to do with it, right? So I think it's just important to know that, yes, our history is important. Yes, we should be aware of it. Yes, we should validate the feelings around it. And then we can figure out what to do with it. But that we also have this other side to us. And that it's important to know that when we embark on these different processes, that's when we can start to break generational cycles. It's like you can't break generational cycles without looking back. So I think it's important to know that. And that's when we can promote healing. So.
Wow. Well, that's a mic drop moment right there. I mean, So somebody, we got it on record. So one day it might be quoted somewhere. But thank you for that. It's not all we're good at. Um, but yes, so thank you for that. And thank you for your powerful message to our community, and to all our listeners out there. And I think this was a very important conversation that needs to keep happening. It's not just, oh, I listened to this podcast. So yes, thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to be here. And yes, that's all I
Thank you
have.
for having me. Thank you.